Hey, what's going on everyone, it's Kyle here and I've been thinking about Assassin's Creed Black Flag recently. I often do, to be fair, and I can't help but dream of a sequel. And I know it's probably never going to happen, but so many ideas have been running through my head. So sit back, have a rum and hear me out. So this is a bit of fan fiction, but it's the structure of the game and the return of a lovable character that's important here. First things first, I'm going to do my best to keep on the official path of Edward's arc. So the bulk of Black Flag 2 will take place between the years of 1722 when he left the Caribbean to 1729, and I'll explain why later. In regards to the structure of the game, I'm not going for a full open world, as I want it to be a linear game and not an RPG. But with some of the areas more open to explore, to parkour in, and even be able to stealthily kill enemies in. So the game is a series of linear missions and some open areas to explore. The linear missions will take around an hour and the open areas will typically take between 3 and 5 hours. Now this is the sort of formula I would like moving forward with the series, and not just a Black Flag sequel. So many fans may not know the lore of Edward after the events of Black Flag. So the opening few hours will be him returning to England in 1722. I'm picturing the opening cutscene being one of the jackdaws sailing towards England with Jennifer asking Edward questions of what's next. Then a short time skip, a few weeks or so the first missions would be Edward settling old scores with Caroline's father, the Templars who burned down his family farm, and with Matthew Haig, who was Caroline's intended fiance. And this will take place in one of those small open areas I was talking about, but this will be in Bristol and there'll be some other side stuff to do as well. Now we know that Robert Walpole stops Edward from killing Matthew Haig and offers Edward a pardon and property in exchange for Matthew Haig's life. So this would be a moment that really kickstarts the game, as Edward can start fresh and travel to London to join the British Brotherhood. And a scene where he meets the Brotherhood in London would be really cool, where Miko welcomes him into the fore, and perhaps Edward's first mission in London could be to assassinate a target who is spying for the Templars. So fast forward to 1725, and at this point I can imagine an area in London to explore. Not a giant open world like Syndicate, but just the surrounding areas around the Kenway mansion, where there are some side activities like having fun with Jennifer and talking with some of the members of the Brotherhood. Maybe Edward even finds some scrolls of the Hidden One Hyphen. And don't worry, there'll be plenty of leap of faith opportunities in these open world areas. So once you've done a bit of exploring, Edward heads back to his new wife Tessa. Now I'm not normally one for raunchy scenes in games, but a moment where they make love and then a time skip to 9 months later when Haytham is born would be cool. It could be like a moment when Ezio was born. And as Edward is an assassin and witnessed what the observatory could do, he plans on searching for more first civilization sites. So it's confirmed that Edward discovers sites in Italy. So I would love him to travel to Italy and search for them around late 1726. Now the obvious ones would be the vault beneath the Colosseum and the Vatican, but I think an Isu temple somewhere in Sicily would be so interesting. It could be a scaled down version of the island so he can search both land and sea for this temple. And in his search, Edward discovers an assassin's hideout taken over by the Templars. He and his crew take them out and discover clues and potential other site locations. He then in turn finds the temple which holds the Shroud of Eden, a cloth capable of restoration and healing. Having witnessed its power, his thirst for knowledge continues, with his next destination being Alamut in Persia, a former Levantine assassin's fortress. Alamut has long been deserted and he decides to enter alone using his eagle vision to enter a secret passage. Edward finds a letter with coordinates in code, but is then ambushed by Templars who have been tracking him since Sicily, but he manages to escape due to the Shroud of Eden with the letter in his pocket. So Edward decides to go back to London, report back to the British Brotherhood of his findings and to see his family. He tells the assassins that the Templar influence reaches even further than he thought and that there are more sites to discover. Edward then hides the Shroud of Eden within the Tower of London, placing the key in a secret room at the top of St Paul's Cathedral. These parts will be mainly cutscenes with small bits of linear gameplay and puzzle solving. Using the many scrolls the assassins have, Edward manages to crack the code in the letter and finds out the coordinates, which pinpoints to a location in Trinidad. It is then that he plans his next voyage. But of course Edward wants to spend time with his family, so he stays in England from late 1727 to mid 1729, co-leading the assassins in London, and in the meantime he takes out 2 Templar targets. Again, these missions will be more linear. So next, Edward and his crew set sail for the Caribbean, with Great Inagua the first port of call to see how the assassins are doing. He is pleased to see Altabai and the assassins doing so well, controlling the territory of the Caribbean islands. And I know this is just going to sound like pure fan service at this point, but hey, I don't care. And Bonnie is also there. Although not an assassin, she is part of the community as a trader and owns her own ship. And it is an amazing moment, their reunion. I love that friendship between Edward and Anne Bonny, and it would be nice to see them enjoy each other's company again, reminiscing and speaking of the likes of Blackbeard and Mary Read. And it could even include a few flashbacks. So then Edward explains why he's in the Caribbean and convinces Altabai and Anne Bonny to join him on his trip to Trinidad. So Trinidad would be very similar to Sicily, where it's a scaled down version of the island free to explore, but would have that Caribbean feel we all love from Black Flag. And there will be optional objectives that will improve your chances of finding a temple. Now the Templars will not be there, as I believe it would be a bit too predictable. So Edward, Altabai and Anne Bonny discover the site and uncover another piece of Eden, a bracelet looking device that could project images of one's future. Edward wears it without knowing its purpose and sees visions of him dying by the hands of Templars. He also sees Haytham as a Templar and cannot quite believe it. The visions affect him incredibly. Altabai and Anne try and comfort him, and when he explains what he saw, Altabai realises what this piece of Eden is. A device that can see into the future and a device that can change futures. He explains this to Edward, and Edward's last words before are, "Then I will not die by the hands of a Templar and Haytham will be an assassin." So then the game ends and is open to interpretation at this point. Did Edward change his fate or not? The player really wants to know at this point, I would assume. But then a cutscene rolls after the credits, and it's Edward stalking Reginald Birch at the Theatre Royale with the bracelet on and assassinates him. It then concludes with Edward and Haytham on top of a rooftop years later with assassin's robes on. That would be so cool, but I wouldn't mind if the game ended the way it did in the Forsaken novel to stay true to the lore. I'm easy, but that's the sort of scenario I would like. Because this is of course a retcon and fanfiction. But I honestly believe that bringing back a beloved character in a more linear format would be a step in the right direction for the series. There will still be social stealth and parkour in all of the open areas I spoke about. The game would be 20 to 25 hours to complete, with tons of replayability, and actual assassins and Templars will be present. What more would you want? And obviously we don't know what happens in the modern day in Valhalla yet. But maybe Desmond somehow returns with Sean and Rebecca at his side again. Desmond never experienced Edward's story, so how cool would it be for him to see Edward in action? Maybe Desmond's time in the Grey, seeing all possible futures, paved the way for Edward to discover the bracelet and change his future. And I know that Haytham is very unlikely to meet Connor's mother in this scenario, so Desmond wouldn't be alive in the modern day. But with Valhalla, anything seems possible now. I mean, it would be amazing for an AC game to have a real structure again, in a linear path, but also have the small open areas to explore in as well. I honestly think this is a way forward, even if it's not a Black Flag sequel. I also think the game should be released like once every 3 years, so Ubisoft absolutely nail it. And for me, this is how they could revitalise the series and stay away from the full RPG formula. But what do I know, eh? Maybe I'm over fantasising a bit, but it was fun to theorise nevertheless. So let me know what you think, like, subscribe, and see you soon.